Alpha.
Hi folks, my name's Richard Gouveia and I'm going to be taking you on a garden bird safari today. I'm a professional wildlife photographer and a Sony Alpha ambassador. And the whole idea behind today's workshop is to teach you how to take photos of birds. We're in a confined environment at the moment, so I'm going to take you through my garden and little spaces that I've created in order to take cool bird pics. This COVID-19 pandemic has taken us and locked us within our houses. So let's try to find a way to have a bit of fun while we're inside. Now, in order to get this party started and get this bird safari underway, there are a few things we're going to have to do first. The first thing we need is a camera. So the one I've chosen to use is an RX10 Mark IV. And it's a really cool camera just because it's a bridge camera, its lens is attached, you can't detach and have to change anything. And it's effectively a 24mm zoom through to a 600 f4. So a really powerful little camera that we can use for this, and the picture quality is sensational. I've been playing with it for a while and just love it. It's really easy to carry around and obviously light and easy to move around. The next thing we have to do is set up our garden. And I think this is one thing that people overlook very quickly, is the idea of thinking out your photos before you actually take them. Ansel Adams always said, we do not take photographs, we make photographs. And in your own garden situation or home situation, you have the control as to where you're going to put a bird. By using things like bird feeders, yeah, we can fill these up with seeds. I use garden bird seed, or this is wild bird seed or garden bird mix. And even during the lockdown at the moment, the pet stores are still open. They're still selling bird seed, so you're able to get the stuff for your birds outside. And where you put your bird feeder will make all the difference as to what type of photo you can get out of it. And you can think about the way this is all going to work. Now, I'm fortunate I have quite a big space to move around inside my garden, and we can set it up in different places. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in different spots so that you can see why I'm putting it there and what my thinking is behind it. First thing we're thinking about is light. How is the light going to hit that area? Where does the morning light hit? Where does the evening light hit? Secondly, and very importantly, and one of the most overlooked thoughts, is what is the background? How far away is the background? Is it a uniform background? Is it a green background? Is it the wall of your house? You have to consider what you're going to do and what you're going to have behind it. Light plays a huge role in powerful bird photographs. So putting a well-lit bird on a very dark background or against a shadow will have a very positive effect on your photograph. So light has a very important role to play, obviously, in photography. So let's start off right in the beginning. Photography, broken down into its two syllables, is photo and graphy. Photo is light and graphy to draw. When we pick up our camera, we have to understand that we are altering the way the camera sees light. It has been programmed to record 19% gray. So how we change our settings and how we set things up will change the way the camera sees things. And once we've set up those shots, we're going to have to look at the different settings that we're going to have to use in each situation. So beyond the bird feeders, there might be good places to think about in terms of photography. I have quite a natural garden, an indigenous garden. So I've planted grasses that have specific seeds, so it brings in little birds like bronze-winged manakins, and these little birds feed on the seeds. So I know exactly where they're coming to and what time they're going to be there. So I have to think about what time I need to be at a specific point, what is my angle going to be, and I have to sit and wait for that shot. Bird photography is far more difficult than wildlife photography in its general sense, just because of the fact that they move really fast. They're in one spot and then they move to another. So I've chosen this spot for one of the bird feeders as it's in a channel through my garden, and the background is quite well removed from behind. So what you'll get is this incredible separation of background or subject from background, which will give us an incredible amount of detail within the birds. It'll also make it easier for the cameras to focus. So it's a nice spot. The other part of it is that the sun sets up top here behind the camera and it rises in the morning on this side. So what we'll also get is some filtered light coming through, maybe create some backlit silhouette images in the morning and some well-lit images in the afternoon. The other part of this is, we were talking about the grass. This is guinea grass, and this grass is eaten by the mannequins that come in. They'll also love this bird seed too, but they'll be feeding on the grass stalks here, so I'll also get a lot of light coming through from the early morning sun coming through, allowing me to get some cool photos of the mannequins. So one of the bird feeders that I've chosen to use is over here, and hopefully that comes out nicely. Right, so the next point that I've chosen to put a bird feeder is just behind me here in the trees just off my patio. One, it's a great place for me to be able to sit and have a cup of coffee in the morning and enjoy the birds. But two, it means that it's higher up off the ground, but I'm still at eye level with that bird feeder. It makes it a far more powerful image to be at eye level with the birds. Putting a bird feeder 15 feet above your head is not going to have the impact, because you're going to be shooting right up at its bum rather than at its eye level. You always have to think about what the viewer is going to perceive that photo as. Even though it's going to be on a bird feeder, I also have trees off to the right where I'll be able to take other photos if they're landing, waiting, because what often happens is the bird feeder gets very full and then there's no space for everyone to be on there, so they're all jostling for position. The other thing to think about with these feeders, especially in positions like this, is to be able to wait for photos where birds might be fighting over a spot on the bird feeder and they need a space. So you'll get birds in flight flapping their wings with others and interaction between those birds, which will be a very powerful shot. Once we've set up everything and we've got our bird feeders in the right place, we've filled them up, we've got our bird bars, we've identified some spots that you might want to think about taking photos. Flowers are good places that would draw in things like white eyes and sunbirds. Just look out for particular spots that might be worth sitting around with. And the biggest part of bird photography is not just being ready, but the patience of waiting. You need to be in a sort of an obscure place that they're not going to feel intimidated. Birds are very intimidated by a lot of things. Right, but what we're going to do is we're going to run through settings. So what I've got here is I've actually left the lens cap on just so you can see, and we'll switch in between what the back screen would look like. So bottom left, we have our shutter speed, 1/200 at this point in time, and you will use the back roller to change that and put that faster or slower. Right. The higher the 1 over the number, the shorter the time it's recording, the faster the shutter speed. Then we have our f-stop, which is our depth of field. The plus minus, which is a very important button. Plus minus is exposure compensation. It's the little dial on the top of the Sony cameras here. And this button, of all of the different things you can shoot on, I think this is one of the most important things. Remember that when they built these cameras, when the clever technicians at Sony put these things together, they needed a baseline. So what they're trying to get is every photo they are trying to get to 19% gray. That is the objective that they have. And within that 19% gray, it might look at an image and go, oh, there's too much dark, I need to lighten it, or it's too light, I need to darken it. They are not there with you taking the photo. That's why that plus minus button is a very important thing. And a good rule of thumb to work off of is when I take the photo, I look at the look at the photo. With the benefit of having our systems of Sony, either through the electronic viewfinder, the eyepiece here, where if I put my eye to it like that, it will show me the picture in the screen here, or on the back screen. I recommend putting it to your eye specifically because you're blocking out a lot of light. You're not going to get glare or reflection off the back screen. And what you're going to do is a silly little thing. I see a lot of people holding their camera like this with their arm coming around. You can hold your camera how you like. This is just unstable. It creates a chicken arm effect where you might start flapping and you're not able to hold the camera steady. If you hold your camera underneath, with your palm underneath, you can dig your elbows in and put it to your eye, thereby making sure that you have the best stability possible. All right, so with the benefit of this, again, is the fact that once we're looking through the eyepiece, if I change my exposure compensation, it is going to show me how bright or dark the photo is. So it takes one level of thought process out. I can look through the eyepiece at my subject, change my exposure compensation by rolling my thumb, and within the eyepiece or on the back screen, you will actually see the number changing. The plus minus will change. So we're at plus 1.3, and if I go to the left, it'll come down to minus. And we come back to painting with light. The plus and minus, light is our commodity. So if we go plus, we're adding light. So if our subject is dark, we want to go plus to add light. Or if our subject is too light, we want to go to minus to take light away. Yeah? So something like a silhouette shot, we would automatically go to minus. And a lot of times with birds, when we're not setting up feeders and one might be in a tree over here or over there, it might be against a bright background. What the camera is going to try and do is bring it back to 19% gray. So we're automatically, once we look at the photo, you're going to see this white background and a black blob where your subject should be. We are trying to add light to our subject because our subject is dark. So we go to the plus and we tick that over, and we can look at it in the viewfinder till we get close enough to say, that's good, no it's not bright enough. Or if you're unsure, you can take a photo, look at the photo, push play, and then come back to it. Cool. So that exposure compensation is a very, 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 very important part of this whole thing. Secondly, the basic setup of this, if I hit the little function button, it says FN. If I hit the function button, it'll pull up my major settings that I want to be able to change. So the first block says high. You can see the 3 blocks after one another. That's the continuous shooting. I put it on high because this is bird photography we're talking about. This is high speed movement. The motion of a wing in one position versus another can make a huge difference to a photo. So on this, because I'm shooting on an electronic or on an electronic shutter type, it will shoot at 20 frames a second. That is incredibly fast. That is a lot of photos, but it's easy to take them, put them on the computer, look at them, and then remove them. The next thing is flash mode. Flash mode, we're not going to use the pop-up flash for this. Its effective distance is probably about 10 meters, so about 30 feet, which is not a huge amount of distance. We're not going to really light things up. You might get a bit of full flash involved, which would be nice, but if you really wanted to make a difference, you could use something like a flashlight, a torch, or get an external speed light to put on top. Give you far more power, work than 90 feet, 30 meters, work much better. So I generally leave the flash mode alone for bird photography. Shutter type I leave to auto. So we have 2 different types of shutter type. You've got mechanical and electronic. Mechanical is an actual movement of something. Electronic is just the reading of the sensor from top to bottom. Auto chooses which one. I like it in auto because that allows me, it will use mechanical when it can, because it's a far stronger system. There's less software that has to go through worrying about bending of a moving object or things like that, distortion that happens. But mechanical shutter is a reliable everyday type of shutter. So I leave it at auto. If I need faster shutter speeds, like 6,000th of a second, 8,000th of a second, I can get that because of my electronic shutter. And I've set my camera into shutter priority because for me, the idea is I'm trying to freeze action, and that's what my goal is. So you can see if I roll this all the way up, we can go all the way to 32,000th of a second because I have the electronic shutter on. If I change that to mechanical shutter, it will drop straight down to 2,000th of a second. That's the fastest I can shoot. And sometimes we want to shoot a bit faster. So that's the reason why I leave it in that. And then, so we put that back to auto. Next to that, we have our focus area. Now, this is so the next to that, we've got our focus area. Focus area is very important in terms of what we're trying to do. At the moment, I've got it on a flexible spot medium. I don't want it on medium. I want to put it on flexible spot small. Aim small, miss small. You're dealing with small things in between little branches. If you have a block that's bigger, it will start focusing on foreground or background and miss your subject. So aim small, miss small. So I like my flexible spot small. What that means is when I'm taking my photo, you can see on the screen that I can move. All right, so in our menu, we have our focus area. If I click on that, there are a few different options. Everything from wide through center, through flexible spot. Flexible spot is my choice. That is where I want to be. I want to be in my flexible spot zone. And I want to choose small. Aim small, miss small. You're dealing with little birds that are flitting about in between branches and leaves and things like that. We want to be able to put that spot exactly wherever our particular point is, but we want the eye in focus, so that's why I would choose small. And the other one that I would possibly use is a lock on AF, this focus area, lock on AF, and keep it on a flexible spot small. What that does is when I'm in the photo and I'm taking something, I can lock onto something and recompose by moving the camera, allowing me to then get or be able to recompose and get the composition that I wanted out of the image. ISO, I've left on auto. The reason is I want as little to think about as possible. And I want to give you as little to think about as possible. If you're comfortable in changing your ISO, please, you're more than welcome to do so. I would do it personally if I'm doing something because I'm trying to judge where I'm at in terms of light, in terms of noise, in terms of what's acceptable in my life or not. And within auto ISO, I can then set up whether I want what my minimum I want to be and my maximum. So let's say on this camera, I just want it to be on 3200 ISO because that's my safe place. So I'm going to leave that at 3200 ISO, and it's going to be an auto between 100 and 3200 ISO. If the camera's not listening to me, then I'm going to then go in and change it manually. Metering mode, I always leave it in multi. You do have center and spot metering and entire screen average and your highlight priority, but I like multi because what it does is it looks at 90% of the screen and then gets it to the 19% gray, and then from there I then take control with my exposure compensation. That becomes my go-to button. That's why they put it within thumb reach here, so I can change shutter speeds and I can change my exposure compensation as I go along. So I'll leave that in multi. White balance, I always leave in daylight. The reason is because I want the camera to record the light as it is being seen, not trying to add blues or anything. I shoot in RAW all the time, so I will then correct any incorrect, or if I wish to warm up a photo or cool a photo down, I'll do that in post-production. with bird photography, things are happening so fast. I don't want to mess around with it, and I don't want to have to be thinking too much along those lines. If I have oodles of time, then I can sit and I can change things and try and build that shot, but I can also think about it in the past tense. I'm going to my DRO or auto HDR. I'm not going to change that or do anything with that, because what HDR effectively is doing is lifting shadows and dropping highlights and trying to balance an image. I could do that in post-production, and I'll show you why I do that or what I do in post-production to do that. And I don't want the camera doing anything to my image that I don't have full, complete control of. We have picture modes or creative styles. Again, unless I'm shooting something, to immediately go out of the camera and straight onto social media, because I can send my images straight from here to my phone and then edit on my phone and send off. I'm not going to change that creative style. Picture profiles, I'm also not playing around. Picture profiles are very much for your video stuff, so that for me is not an issue. And your priority set in auto white balance. So that's my basic setup of how I would have the camera. The other part of the camera that I like to have done, and I'm just gonna hop up here and come across. In my setup menu, in setup menu 2 of 6, there is touch operation. Now, I've set mine up to a touchpad. You can also have the screen as a touch screen that you're going along, but I want it as a touchpad because on this RX10, I do not have a joystick to be able to move my focus point around. So I have to use the little cursor that has the up and down, my circular button here, and I would have to hit up, down, left, right in order to get to that point. So what I've set it up as is touchpad only. So when I am in a sighting or doing some form of photography, I can put my eye there and I will use my finger on the screen and move it around, and it will move my focus point around for me. So that is a very important thing to take into consideration. In the touch pattern things, I say relative position, whole screen. I can change it to the right half of the screen or right quarter of the screen. This is just in case, and I'm actually going to change that to right half. The reason is I have a big little schnozzer that goes in here, and I can actually see my nose prints on here. And what happens is, as I put my nose on here, it moves my focus point, and then I have to try find it and move it and do all of these things. So I'll leave it on the right half. Beyond those basic settings, I'm shooting in RAW and I'm trying to maximize what I'm getting out of this. So now we're going to go on and I'll take you out of the studio and we're going to look at a couple of shot setups out in the garden at one or two of the spots, depending on what we can find. And then after that, we'll take you straight into taking the images, putting them into Lightroom, and how I would do my basic edits of those images. Good morning, guys. It's just after 6 a.m. Sun is rising behind me, enjoying a cup of coffee and getting set up for a couple of bird photos. Best time of the day is always early morning and late evening, just as the light's coming through. You can see how the light's going to filter through all of the trees here and we're going to use that as hopefully a medium to get some backlit shots, some beautiful different shots that we're going to get. So today's a big day of shooting and trying to get some photos, and then we'll run through some editing later. And as I shoot, I'll run through one or two examples of what I'm doing on the camera so you can see what's happening in camera when we're taking the photos. Right, so we've come down to the shooting aspect of our time. I've been shooting off of this, but what we've set up here basically is so that I can show you a bit of what's happening inside the camera and how I do things inside the camera. Today's conditions are a little dark. There's a big storm coming through, so we might hear some thunder rolling through, but I've set the camera on a tripod here and it's feeding into my laptop so that we can see, so I can record what's happening on that screen. Now, The number one important thing to remember is shutter speed. Remember, we're trying to slow the action down. So we want to go into shutter priority and choose our shutter speed. We've spoken about this already, and then I leave my ISO in auto. So at the moment, because it's so dark, at 400th of a second, which it's seeing now, so I've set it up looking at the bird feeder, at 400th of a second, if I hold my focus button down, it is taking 6400 ISO. So there's not a lot of light. It's using as much ISO as it can in order to get things. If I was less worried about noise, I could go higher in my ISO, no problems. So that's where we are there. Remember, I'm going to bring this down just for the option of being able to see this, but we have our exposure compensation. So if I go to the plus, you will see the image get lighter, and if I go to the minus, it'll get darker. And how we judge this is because photography is painting with light, light and graphite to draw, or painting with light. If our subject is too dark, we go to the plus to bring more light to it. If our subject is too light, we go to minus to bring down the light off of it. So that's our commodity we're playing with. And what we will do is we'll then start shooting. The biggest thing to remember is that you can see the little focus block. If I'm holding down the focus block and I move it, I can move it around using my little wheel at the back, thereby allowing me to recompose and do things. To show you the difference between large, there's medium and large. So bigger blocks, I like to think aim small, miss small. Others might think that a bigger one is easier to aim at, but when you're dealing with birds, okay, on a bird feeder like this, large is not a problem. But when you've got twigs and little things in the way, what ends up happening is you keep on focusing on the wrong stuff. So that's the basic setup here. Let's wait for some birds and see if we can get some photos of them. Right, so we got some birds on the bird feeder at the moment. What I'm going to show you is that if we go into the function menu, the FN on the back, and we choose our different spots, we were talking about small spot, medium spot, large spot. I'm in flexible small, which allows me things, but if I go down to the flexible tracking, the lock-on tracking at the bottom, what will end up happening is you will see, now that the birds have flown away, how it follows the bird feeder that's swinging. So don't be afraid to use that, but in static situation it's easier to use the lock-on small in terms of the not the lock on flexible spot small, because we can aim between branches. And if you're doing birds in flight or stuff like that, then the lock on is really good because you can find it, it'll lock onto it and follow it as it goes. So here we got another little bird that's flown in, and what it's done, I'm not going to use the tracking because now I'm shooting through the branches. So if you look at how I've moved the focus spot to get on it, and then by moving the spot and then focusing, what I'm getting is my exact point that I want in focus without it trying to find or fight through any of the branches that are going on the outside. Let's take some photos of that little guy. Right, I'm going to move this round here because I have a crested barbet that's sitting against a very bright background. And what we're going to do, and this is where the exposure compensation comes in, is if I move it to the plus and roll it over, what I'm going to do, because my subject's dark and the light in the background is good, if I go to the plus, what I'm doing is adding light to the subject. It's going to blow the background out a little bit, but what ends up happening is I can now see the colors on the chest and get the bird's coloration rather than just the sky. We can then move our focus point around to get it on the bird to get the correct composition and shoot along with that. So always be aware of that. You can darken it and create a silhouette, and in the editing I will show you one bird that I've silhouetted, a green wood hoopoo that I've silhouetted against a background. But for the most part we're trying to get the colors and trying to get things. And because we're shooting birds, what ends up happening is we shoot up and to the sky, and very often our bird comes out dark and the colors aren't represented. So always remember that your exposure compensation. Now over the last few days I've been shooting in various spots. Obviously we're using the bird feeders as one point, and then in different points around the garden. So trees with fruits have been pulling in things like speckled mouse birds and grey go-away birds, and I've had white eyes and beautiful little birds flitting about, and each one's had different senses. Just remember that each situation is different. Think about what your background is going to be, what your foreground is going to be, if you're shooting through things, and how you're going to focus on that. And then most importantly, watch out for your shutter speed. Shutter speed is a very, very important part of the whole thing. As we've gone around these things, I've created very different images, and we're going to look at editing a few of them, and you would have seen a whole bunch as we've been going through this presentation. So let's head back to to my office, where we're going to start editing and going through some of the images that I've taken. Alright, so we have completed our photos. We've taken some time in the garden. It took like 2 mornings and a little bit in between to do some photos. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to run through a brief bit of editing. Now, editing can go incredibly deep, or it can be just a flitter on the top. It depends what you like. My idea of editing, personally, is to try and replicate what I saw in the field. The camera is not as good as my eyes, and because of that fact, I need to edit. Film recorded light as it came in. Then there was still editing that was done in a dark room. Granted, it was much tougher because it was completely black inside there and you used different chemicals, but you could lighten, you could darken, you could saturate colors, you could overexpose, you could underexpose, you could do many different things within a dark room. So I'm going to show you Lightroom, which is an Adobe product. There's other products that you're more than welcome to use, but I'm just going to give you a general oversense. So we'll choose a couple of images to look at, and from that point we'll see what I do. So unless I'm going to print an image, I'm not going to edit too far into it unless I see a creative side to that image. And there might be 1 or 2 that we're going to look at that might warrant a bit more creativity than others. But beyond that, it's just about the small things. So let's hop on in. First image I'm going to choose. So I've already gone through my images. I took 2,600 images. I'm not shy on images. I'd rather take a hell of a lot and leave a lot to the side, and I pick out what I want and what I don't want. So I'm going to look at this image first of a mannequin, and now we open it up. In Lightroom we have a library mode, which is basically our cataloging, and then we have the develop mode, which is where we go in and we actually start working on things, and that's up on the top level of the thing. Of the screen. So we've got this mannequin. On the top left of the screen you can see over here, you can see the different settings that I had. So I was at 1/320th of a second at f4 and ISO 2000 at 220 mils. So you can see I was pretty close to the thing, so I was standing right there. He was quite comfortable with me being right on top of him, and so we went in and did that. Now, when I look at the image, the first thing I look at is composition. Do I like the composition? Do I want to close the composition? Is there some way that we're going to work this? What I'm going to do is I'm going to crop. So there's a button up at the top here, the little crop overlay. It's a little square, and I'm going to click that, and I'm going to recompose this image. So I'm going to tighten it down on this guy because we have a bit of room to move in. There's some beautiful color on him and a little bit of iridescent green down the side there, and this is the bronze wing mannequins that I was referring to earlier. You can see he's got a seed in the mouth. There's a seed falling down here, and in general everything is really sharp, beautifully crisp. Even at 2000 ISO, if you look at the image, there's next to no noise. And this is my to and fro about noise and how we're going to do it. The next thing I always look at is Lightroom's got it pretty logically set out down the side here. So when I look at the side of the screen here, first we're going to look at white balance. is the white balance okay? Because I had chosen Sony as my white balance, and because I shoot in RAW, Sony generally pulls it in correctly. So you can see the colors and the light on him are pretty fine, but we can choose any of the things. So if I wanted to go to cloudy, I could do that and add a bit of warmth to it. I'm just gonna zoom out of this so that you can see a bit better. I can go to what we shot it as. We can go to fluorescent, which will make it much more blue. And it's all about how we use light. Daylight is what we shot it in. And when I look at that, if I go to as shot, you will see it is, oh, it's a little bit down. Daylight was a little bit warmer, so I'm going to choose daylight. It's a little bit warmer. If I go into as shot, even as it read it, there's a little bit of blue, a little bit more blue. So I want to go through that. If I wanted to test it, and I know, say that this is white, I can use the dropper, click on that, and it will automatically fix my white balance. White balance is about getting whites to white. So we're happy with how that works. Then we're going to look at exposure. Is it bright enough or dark enough? I think there's no issues with the exposure on that image. Contrast, I don't like using contrast. I would rather, within my highlights and shadows down here, choose to add a bit of contrast in there. And once I've played with texture, clarity, and dehaze, that's also going to add contrast as I need it. Very often what I find is that if I bump the whites a little, what you'll have is a little bit more punch through the bits and maybe some highlights. But what I'm always trying to watch is this histogram. Here you can see my whites. So if I put them on here, or if I hit option and hold it in, you can actually see where my highlights are blown out. Now I don't care about the highlights down at the bottom, on the bottom of the bird feeder, because for me that doesn't bother me down here. But I do care about the detail within this. So we'll bump it up a little bit there. Then texture, I love the texture slider. Just a little bit of texture, never much more than 30. It automatically adds a whole bunch of oomph, and it's like a sharpening tool that's just so intuitive that they've added to this program. It really is cool. Clarity is a nice one too, because we can add a little bit more, but again, don't overdo these things, because the more you do it, you can see the noise that's being generated on the side here. Now when I look at the noise on the side there, you know, there's nothing on the bird because of the fact that we're doing stuff. We've got that pretty sharp, but there's a lot on the side here. So I'm actually going to switch those off. Now you can see my noise is far better on the sides. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the paintbrush. I'm going to click auto mask down the bottom here. You can see auto mask, and this is my brush size and my feather. I'm going to bring the feather down. Feather means how much around it is it going to slowly slope off from 100% to 0. And I'm going to put my flow up to 100%, and let's crack on. Now I've put at the bottom here, you can see it says show selected mask overlay, or the shortcut is O, and I'm going to click on that so I can see in red where I'm painting. I'm not going to be incredibly accurate with this, but I'm going to show you what it does in general. If I don't like what I've done, I can then hit the Alt button or Option button, and I can change that so that it's a minus, and I can go around, and if I colored outside the lines or my auto mask didn't work too well, this will pick up where it worked and where it didn't, and fix those lines up for me. Okay, this is just very roundabout. Then we hit O. My exposure was down, so let's put that back to normal. Now I'm going to add my texture and a bit of clarity to the image, and now you can see that bird is really popping, and I haven't disturbed anything around it. So I've just brought a little bit more punch to the bird. Nothing that you're going to look at and go, oh my goodness, that looks obtuse or it's over the top. I quite like that. And then let's lift the shadows a little bit so that the area around the eyes lightens up, so that we come to a good thing. And that is pretty much everything that I would do to it. I wouldn't sharpen it any more than that. Let's have a look at Y, you can see the before and after of these images to see how the edit went. So you can see I did a tiny bit of editing. There wasn't a huge change overall to everything. And it's just about enhancing a little bit, and just 2 minutes of editing can bring a lot of things out. All right, let's move to the next image. So this is a crazy silhouette image of a green wood hoopoe that jumped onto a weaver's nest, and it started using its long bill to probe in it to find insects, and as it found an insect, it was pulling it out and popping it into its mouth, and you can actually see the insect flying into the mouth. So it's a pretty drab coloration. Obviously it's a silhouette, so you can see the beautiful bill, you can figure out with the bird, you can see he's eating, there's a whole bunch of things going on there. But I want to make this more interesting. I just want to bounce this a little bit more. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check my exposure. I'm quite happy on the exposure. If I pull the shadows up, you'll see his coloration, but it just loses, you get this soft waftiness over the image, which I don't like. So I'm not going to pull that up too much. I might pull it up a little bit so I can get a bit of the tail detail and get a little bit of color in the bill. From there, I'm going to add texture and I'm going to add clarity. It can go across the whole screen because we're not stuck too far into a bad place there. I'm going to warm the image up so that the grass starts to be a little bit more its own color. And now this is a trick that I love doing. It works wonders for sunsets and for these silhouette shots if you don't get the coloration out of it. But there is a section here called split toning. What split toning does is it splits your coloration where you can color either your highlights or your shadows depending on how you want to do it. Now, my shadows I don't want to touch because that's part of my silhouette. But my highlights, the sky, which is now this plain, almost gray, creamy color, is very uninteresting. So I'm going to play with this, and if I put my saturation up, you can automatically see the color of the sky behind changing. And if I roll through the hue, you can see the color that I could choose for that sky or that highlight. So, I mean, just for the sake of being different and difficult, let's do something that's more purple, just because. And let's go out again so you can see what the end result is. We could bump that up and make that more intense. We could soften it a little bit so it's just got a soft hue, or I can pull it down. No, I actually prefer the red down here. So I'm going to leave it at red, and I'm going to bump this up. And then there's a balance column just down here, which allows me to choose how far into the highlights and shadows I dip into. So I'm going to build that across a little bit so that it has a wider gamut of highlight that it's picking up. And beyond that, that would be my image. So again, let's have a look at the before and after. So from something a little uninteresting, there is something that's irritating me in this image, which is up at the top here. There's another insect flying around. At the top of this here, we have a little button called the spot removal tool. If I click on that, it's automatically clicked on here at the bottom. It says visualize spots. I'm going to switch that off because I can already see where my spot is, and I'm going to click on that. If I wanted to take this one step further, the one thing that is irritating me in this image is this branch coming in behind him, and I might be naughty and go into Photoshop, especially for a print, and remove that branch so that he's a full silhouette against a good background. Cool. Right, one last image to look at as we go down. Let's look at a grey go-away bird which was feeding in my garden. When I was shooting the bird, it was against, it's quite a dark grey bird as you can see, against quite a light sky, and what you're getting then is the camera's trying to find its way between. So what I was looking at is my histogram. When I was in the camera, this histogram up at the top, I can set it so I can see it in my eyepiece. That means I can look at what the light is like on either side. So I make sure I don't clip any blacks or any whites so that I've got full color detail, which means that within that I can recover a lot of those points. So let's see what I'm going to get out of this image. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work on my highlights. So my color temperature should be fine because I shot in Sony. So I'm going to leave that, and then exposure should be fine because again, I don't want to push it and pull it. I've worked the exposure out in camera. I'm going to drag the highlights down. I'm going to show you that again from a wider perspective here. I'm going to drag the highlights down to recover some of the highlights so you get a bit of that blue coming through, and I'm going to recover some of the shadows. Now you start seeing the bird against the blue sky as what you might have seen it. We can add a little bit of black. This is the contrast part of it, because as we're dragging the shadows up, you're losing some of those blacks, and you want that texture rich thing. So texture, we're definitely going to bump up a little bit, and clarity, which is a medium form of contrast, I'm going to use there. Dehaze, I could use, you can see how it brings out the blue in the sky. So let's do a tiny touch of dehaze, and I might lift this guy out a little bit more so we get more out of him. And then we have down at the bottom here hue, saturation and luminance, HSL or color. And in HSL I can choose hue, saturation or luminance. Saturation means how saturated your blues are, if you want them rich blues or dark blues. So I'll give you an example. If I go blues here, you can see it get very rich, or I can take the color right out of it. And then luminance is how light or dark those colors are. So if I lighten them, you'll see the blues disappear. If I darken them, you can get a big pop. But look at the edge of the lure here. Now you can see a halo. So you have to be very careful that you're not overdoing any of these things, because you will start getting a halo. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drop that a little bit to create a little darker blue without impacting my bird, and I might pop the saturation up just to create a little bit more love in that. And let's zoom out. The last thing I want to do is maybe crop this in just a touch, just to create more of a thirds, and that is our before and our after, so you can see exactly what it looks like there. So I hope you enjoyed our tutorial, our workshop on this bird photography. Obviously we're just touching the edges, but it's about practice, guys. You're not going to get out there and just push the button and get a million great shots. I just hope that you have the patience to observe it and take the time to enjoy it. The most exciting part of it is getting the photograph. The second most is just sitting and being part of it. We're in lockdown at the moment, so it's really nice to be able to settle in and enjoy. And until our next workshop, guys, keep safe, stay at home, and enjoy your time.